Sponsorships in college football have been pretty prevalent for a really long time. Whether it's bowl games, preseason contests, naming rights for stadiums, for fields, whatever the case may be, that corporate money has come into college football in ways that I don't even know that you'd maybe potentially recognize right away. You know, for instance, that there's a sponsor on the net behind the field goal posts, or that there's a sponsor on the earpiece of a coach's headset. It's everywhere. The one place it hasn't been is in conference names. In the Big 12, in an effort to shrink the ever-widening gap between the SEC and Big Ten revenue-wise, is considering taking on a corporate partner to sell 20% of the conference stake in exchange for $1 billion deal. And I can't for the life of me think about how and why anybody thinks this is a good idea. Essentially, the way Brett McMurphy reports it is that Allstate is considering spending $1 billion with the Big 12 over the course of however long to rename the conference the Allstate Conference or the Allstate 12 or whatever the case may be, which is preposterous to me because when you think of there are, again, college football math, there are 16 teams in the Big 12, which is dumb because they have, like, just quick sidebar for a moment. Everybody's made fun of the Big 10 for a really long time because they have not had 10 teams for 30 years. But in their wisdom, the Big 12 went back and copyrighted all the numbers, right? Like every number but Big 10. They have the copyright to Big 11, Big 12, Big 13, Big 14, Big 15, in whatever. Like they probably have the Big Trillion. And yet, they haven't switched from Big 12 to Big 16. Like, you own Big 16. Just be the Big 16. Be the Big 20. If you add 13 more members, you can be the Big 29. You own that. You own the numbers. So use it. That's neither here nor there. The revenue gap between the Big 10 and SEC and the revenue gap between the Big 10/SEC and the Big 12 is really wide. And in an effort to close that gap, they are selling or hoping to get a private entity to give them a bunch of money. So $30 to $50 million per year is what the projected total was in the report. If it's $50 million a year, which is on the high end, which is the high end, it's like $3 million a school. I'm sorry, but $3 million a school doesn't really close that gap at all for the Big 12 versus the SEC and Big 10. It just doesn't do anything. And I realize that it's preposterous to say that $3 million doesn't get you anything in college sports anymore, but it doesn't. It helps pay down the buyout of a bad coach that you hired that you wish you hadn't. Congrats. It doesn't do anything for you, and it makes you look really Mickey Mouse, really rinky-dink, that you've spent all of this time cultivating a brand of, like, we are a Power 4 conference. We are on the same level as the Southeastern Conference and the Big 10. And, oh, by the way, we're now called the All-State 12. Nothing says you don't belong quite like having to scrimp and claw and fight to pretend as if you belong. So it's a ridiculous thought process. I don't know why you would scrap a brand like the Big 12 in exchange for $3 million per school. Like, there are schools in the Big 12 that might be able to get $3 million a year for naming rights of their stadium. And nobody gives a damn if you play an all-state stadium, right? Like, nobody's like looking at Iowa State side-eyed. Can you believe these people think they're on the same level? They play at all-state stadium. But when you play in the all-state conference, it means a little different. And it's the sort of the same thing, like in a bowl game, right? Like, You can attach sponsors to them. I couldn't tell you who sponsors the Rose Bowl because it's the Rose Bowl. Now, it was the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl for a long time, but it's not anymore. You have the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. And then you have the MPCcomputers.com Bowl or the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl. Do those two things sound like they are on the same level? Because no, they are not. In racing, it's there's the Daytona 500 and the Indianapolis 500 and the Anderson's Maple Syrup 250 presented by Menards. Do those two things sound like they are on the same level to you? No, they don't. Because one sounds ridiculous. The All-State Conference, the All-State 12 Conference, the Big All-State Conference, and the Southeastern Conference, or the Big Ten. Now, again, somebody in college football this year, two teams in college football this year are going to play in the Snoop Dogg Arizona Bowl. So I'm not saying that I'm above accepting money in exchange for your dignity. But if that money is only $3 million a year for your dignity, shouldn't you demand a little bit more than that? Because when you are essentially saying, hey, we are, when you're taking private money, when you're taking money to become the All-State Conference, you are saying, I can no longer compete with the SEC and Big Ten. Now, generally, you want to hide that fact, right? You want to make sure that recruits don't see that TV networks don't see that you are not on the same level, that the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't see that you are on the same level, that coaches that you want to come coach, whether it be assistants or head coaches, don't recognize that you're not on the same level. And instead, the Big 12 is putting a damn highlighter on it. And it just doesn't make a lick of sense to me. And yet, I would not be shocked one bit that they're going to do it. And it reeks of desperation, but it also reeks of just flat out admitting, hey, we can't play on the same field as those people revenue-wise, and the only way we're going to get there is by quasi-corporate prostitution. And I just don't know. I just don't know that that's the best course of action in 2024 to closing that revenue gap. The best course of action is to do everything you can to keep Texas and Oklahoma, or to elevate the brands that are already in your conference, to pour in every single dollar that you can to make your football programs as great as possible. Because while the Big 12 might be the best basketball conference in America, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things revenue-wise. So you got to be great at football if you're going to remain on that same level as the Big Ten and SEC in this Darwinian world of dog eat dog, only the strong survive. Survival is not $3 million a year to sell your dignity and look like an idiot in the grand scheme of the college football world. But that's neither here nor there. I think they're going to do it. And I think they're foolish for doing so. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we're pumping out. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. See you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.